Welcome everybody. So my name is James Greig. I'm now a lawyer. So for 9 years I was a pastor and I did theology at Cambridge. What we're going to do today in the museum is we're going to track through, because there's so much in a museum like this, you can't cover everything, right? And I think you wouldn't want me to. So we just have to pick a theme, and our theme today is the Bible. Okay, so the Bible in the Ashmolean. Similarly, in the British Museum, when I do tours there, you must pick a theme, because otherwise there's too much information. You have to track one theme. So, being very bold, so my subtitle for this is From Creation to Oxford to the Ends of the Earth. So it's a very big scope, and we're going to try and cover this in one afternoon. But the way we can do this is by being quite selective. So I'm going to pick a few items from different times during history. So before our break, we're going to do our Old Testament and the New Testament before a break. Then we have a half-hour break, and you can go to the loo or whatever you want to do, or you can carry on looking around. The second half, we're then doing church history. So this is from the end of the New Testament period up to the present day. So, what else can I tell you? The first thing we're going to look at relates to someone called C.S. Lewis. Now, does anyone know, when I talk about C.S. Lewis, who is that? He wrote some very famous books.
I'm not sure which one. Is it Harry Potter or is that something else?
It's similar. It's another like a modern fiction fantasy thing. So it's The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Oh,
And that also is all the Narnia things is from C.S. Lewis. And no, that's someone else. Don't ask me who, I don't know. I know Judy Garland's in it, but I don't know who wrote it. So the reason we're talking about C.S. Lewis is C.S. Lewis lived in Oxford. Originally he was from Northern Ireland, but he came to Oxford and was a student here at University College. And when he came here, I expect, like many Oxford students, he would have visited the museum. And you can see some evidence of him visiting the museum because when you read his books, you can see some evidence that possibly he got some ideas for his book from things he saw here when he was like 18 years old. Okay, so we're going to go in first of all and look at one of the objects which I think had an influence on C.S. Lewis. So you can see behind here a creature. Now, what is unusual about this creature? Have you ever seen one of these in the zoo?
No.
Is it a real thing?
No.
How do you know? You said it's got a bird's head and it's got wings, but is the body of a bird?
No.
No.
A human, yeah.
So, what is this? So this is carved in stone, and this is an original. It's not a copy, this is an original that was carved in stone by some people who are mentioned in the Bible, the Assyrians. Have anyone ever heard of the Assyrians?
Yeah.
And can you name any Assyrians? A famous Assyrian king?
Is it Darius?
His Persian comes later.
Okay.
So the most famous Assyrian king would probably be Sennacherib. He was very powerful. And do you know where the capital did move a bit, but there's a very famous capital of Assyria mentioned in the book of Jonah. So what was that capital city where Jonah had to go and preach?
Nineveh.
Nineveh. So Nineveh, that is the same as this. Now this I think is not from Nineveh, it's from another palace, but there would be carvings like this in Nineveh. So now it's a bit like you're in the book of Jonah for the first time, right? And you're now seeing something which Jonah would see when he went to preach to the city. So we are taking you back in time, right, all the way, and you're coming in at the ground level at the time of Assyria. So that's why it's inspiring coming to the museum, because you suddenly realise, it's real. So Nineveh is not a made-up place like Hogwarts. I'm sorry, but Hogwarts is made up, right? There isn't a real place called Hogwarts. It's not in Scotland. It's not anywhere. It's made up. So Narnia, I'm afraid, is also made up. But Nineveh, it's in the Bible, it's made up. No, it's not made up. Nineveh is a real place. And I think that's important as we go around to understand the difference between what is a fact of history and what is just made up. Because when it comes to the stories in the Bible, the narrative stories, these are about real events and real people. So it's important that you can put your trust in that, whereas something like a work of fiction is just a work of fiction. So, and on your leaflet, you can see there is a character in C.S. Lewis's book, The Last Battle, which looks very like this one. And I think maybe
Got the
you
idea
thought it
from
up.
here.
Can you see? Can you see the picture? What's the name of the character? Ah, thank you. So she's seen the front has got the whole big picture.
Yeah.
What about the C.S. Lewis character? Ah, you see Tash, can you see the similarity? So you think, did C.S. Lewis just think that up? Or did he maybe notice it here? I don't know for sure. Right, I don't know if he actually walked here or wherever this was at the time. But very high likelihood. He was a very clever guy. I'd be surprised if he didn't come into Ashmolean quite a few times while he was here. Okay? And by the way, what this would have been originally is this was there to sort of scare you and impress you. Right? It's like, when you're a student, what do you want to do? You're a student, you want to buy cool posters, why to impress your friends, and they come into your room, that you're a cool guy to know. Right? And I was very uncool, honestly. Things like put in my I had all my sermon tapes in alphabetical order. One of my Christian friends said, you are really not relating to all people here. It's very weird and nerdy. So when you keep all these things like that, because most people are like, they don't have these things. So this would also have a message. You put this, and this was about showing your power, and this would have been a protective spirit that not a real creature, but one of the many spirits in the spirit world that they believed in, and this would be there to intimidate people who are coming in to visit the king. So this is like a little introduction to C.S. Lewis, and also how seeing things today, you can remember them later, and they might work their way into other bits of your life, like they did with C.S. Lewis. So the next room we're going to go into is our Old Testament room, largely. So we're going to look at 4 or 5 things that relate to the Old Testament. So we're beginning here where the Bible begins, like the story part, which is with Abraham. And Abraham is from a city called?
All of Guardian.
Are you saying or are you just saying you don't know the answer?
Chaldees.
Okay, of the Chaldees. Chaldees is also another name for the Babylonians, but it wasn't called the Chaldees when Abraham was living here. And can you see down there?
Yeah.
So that's how it's spelled. And you can see here, these are lots of rivers here. This is especially the Tigris and Euphrates that are flowing down here. And this is part of what's called the Fertile Crescent. So because of the water here, this is fertile. And then it comes round here, and then it becomes, and you see Israel and the coast here. And this in the middle, this is like desert. Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Iraq, this bit. So you have to come, it's quite a crescent, you have to go round like that. So we're now in the Old Testament times here. Now, when it comes to the dating of the Old Testament, so I have 4 dates that help me to place everything, because otherwise it can get very confusing. Like it's David before Daniel, like this is too complicated. So this is, I'm not going to ask you a question, I'm just going to tell you this is how I do it. So I've got 4 dates. 2000 BC is Abraham. Okay, I'll test you on that later. 2000 BC, Abraham, when he's here in Ur. 1400 BC is Exodus, okay, when the Israelites leave Egypt. 1400 BC. Then 1000 BC is the time of the United Kingdom, of David and Solomon and the Temple. So this is like the high point for the Old Testament Israel. And then 400 BC is the end of the Old Testament period. Sometimes it's called the intertestamental period. So this is when nothing happens in the Bible until John the Baptist suddenly comes on the scene. So the Old Testament closes around 400 BC with the book of Malachi. Okay, so those 4 dates help me to put things in the right place. So when you work, where's Daniel, where's David, and all these other things, so I fit them into into those 4 numbers. So that helps me. So we've got some geography, and I've given you some chronology. But also to help you in the leaflet inside, you can see I've put a list of everything that we're going to see in chronological order. So if you'd look here, you can see top left, you can see patriarchs and prehistory. Can you see that on the top left?
Yes.
And then it goes down Egypt, Israel, Assyria. We already saw something from Assyria, right? So if you want to, you can tick that off. You just saw the relief there. and the winged genie, possibly Tash. Okay, so you've already seen one object. If you like to tick this off as you go through. Then there's Babylon, and then Persia, and then across on the right-hand side, you can see Greece, Rome, England, and the ends of the earth. Okay, so this is chronological from the old all the way through up to the present day. So we're starting off now in the Old Testament period. Okay, come on, I'll show you something, and then where are we? Okay, don't say we're in Ashmolean. Okay. Where are we? In the Old Testament, and which city are we in? The city from which Abraham came from? Well done, you're top students. And what date are we? Around 2000 BC. Very good. Excellent, that's very good. Just checking that you're all switched in and on the same wavelength. So now, where Abraham was from was This was a very sophisticated city for the time. It was excavated by an Englishman called Leonard Woolley, and in he found about 20% of the houses there was writing in. So this shows there's some education going on there. Not just that, there were two-story dwellings. So this isn't just like in England at the time, you're living in a mud hut or living under a tree or something like this. No, these are sophisticated people in This is like the California of the whole world. This is where you really want to live if you possibly can. Is like top city. And at the same time, Egypt. So those are the two places you'd most want to live, where you had you didn't have air conditioning, but you know you had it was the place to be. These were the top cities. And so you can see what's on my left here. These are things from after Abraham. You see the dates there from 2000 to 1600. But in here, look at some of the things going on. Here, you got your times tables. Okay, so you couldn't escape. So back then, they were doing times tables. Their base number was 60, not 10. So that is confusing if you're, I don't know the difference, but I think if you're a maths teacher, you'll understand that. But that's their times tables. They've got lists of kings and history. On the far right, there's a thing called the Sumerian king list, which is like where you can see it's that object, like a square object. And in there, it refers to the kings before the Great Flood and the kings after the Great Flood. So you can see there's a consciousness of a great flood which had existed before the time of Abraham in their consciousness. Here you can see down here, this is a riddle. So I think this also shows, and I'll tell you why I'm telling you this in a minute. This is a riddle, and the question is this. And this is, by the way, this is like a Lord of the Rings, you know, when Bilbo or the Hobbit, Bilbo tells riddles and you have to guess the answer. So this one says, when I was small, I was the child of a plant. When I grew big, I was the body of a god. And when I became old, I was the country's physician. What am I? So now, I would never guess that. Anyway, the answer is linen. So I'm not quite sure how that all works, but it's just the idea is that it's you know, like they're doing clever sayings and riddles to each other. And why am I telling you all this? This is because I want you to see this is not just a bunch of people who are just hitting each other with clubs and then going to eat berries and then killing a mammoth and then having steaks on a bonfire, right? These are sophisticated people. So when Abraham is called to leave, he is leaving a sophisticated place where there is culture, where there is learning. There are interesting things being discussed in the coffee shops, if they have coffee shops. But it's an interesting place. This isn't just like a mud hut village. And where is Abraham called to go? Is he called to go to an even better city somewhere else? Where does God call Abraham to go?
He said a place he will show him.
Yeah. He says, I'm not even telling you where it is. Trust me. And in fact, for the rest of his life, Abraham has to live where? In a 2-story dwelling? 5-story dwelling? No. Where does Abraham live? Tents. So when the angels come to visit him, he says, come into my tent. He's going from town, from city, from education and schools and math times tables to being in a tent, no schools, no education, no doctors. So which would you do? So this is the faith of Abraham. That Abraham is called, that's why he's known as the father of faith. Because he's leaving like a first world country, because he's been called by God to go to a place of suffering, okay, a place of more uncertainty. And that's very hard for us in our modern world, because we always like to have more security. I do. I mean, as a 55-year-old man, I like to have more certainty. I don't want to just go and live like a student. I don't want to go to festivals because it's a little bit dirty and messy and muddy. I like my nice things now. Abraham is called to leave. Now, here's another question for you: is when Abraham leaves, and if you watched Abraham and his family leaving, what can you see? Right? What are they? They obviously haven't got a lorry. So how are they travelling? Are they travelling with the horses, or are they travelling with camels, or what are they travelling with? Any guesses?
Like horses and then dragging carts.
I expect horses and carts, and we know there's some camels because we read later in Genesis that Abraham actually does a battle with some camels. So, amazingly, we have got a model in here, a model made by like a toy, showing a wagon from the time of Abraham. Now, this is not a model of the wagon that Abraham used. Okay, don't get too excited. But it's a model showing what was happening at the time. And when you see it, I think if you're like me, it will remind you of some special type of movie which has these wagons in. So I'll see if you're the same as me. This is from 2000 BC, which remember is the time of Abraham. So it's been dated to 2000 BC, so it's right around that time, and it's just over here. Now, what does this remind you of?
It's like cowboy type.
Sorry?
Those cowboy type.
Cowboys. I said it's a type of film, the westerns, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you see? It's like a covered wagon. What happens when the Red Indians come and they're firing arrows? You make a circle, right? Circle the wagons.
Yeah.
And then you lie underneath them and you fire out with your muskets from underneath the wagons. But look at that, isn't that amazing? Now, before I saw that, never even occurred to me to imagine what it is that, how Abraham is traveling. What is his kit? So but that is better than just conjecture. So that at least is a toy made by somebody at the same time. So, and obviously it's a very practical structure, and that's why they made it. And similar in the Wild West, you just got some wood, you got some sheeting, you end up with a similar structure. But also, of course, you can see they've got wheels. So if someone says, had the wheel been invented by the time of Abraham? Well, now you know. You can see because there are wheels on the wagon. So archaeology, when we find these things, these help build a picture. It doesn't just prove the Bible, it also helps build a better picture. Now, the other thing I want to show you before we leave is to do with their religion and their spirituality. Okay, they had, like many people, they believed in the afterlife, right? And they had, like the Egyptians, they had the mummies. This isn't something that was invented with Jesus. Okay, people have always wondered, and what happens? Like, we can't just die, we must carry on. What happens next? And we've always been wondering about that, and people all over the world do. So, but sadly, what they often did was, if you were the king, you would often want to take things with you into the afterlife. And in this case, sadly, this particular king, he took with him lots of women and lots of oxen. And they all had to be killed. When he was killed, they all had to be killed, and they're all buried in the tomb together. And it's known as the Great Death Pit of Again, imagine, this is where Abraham is coming from. So it's got all these nice things about it, but it's also got some horrible practices of people having their lives ended prematurely just because the king wants to take them with him. So if you look over here, this is jewellery from the Great Death Pit of Can you see? Yeah. So they found this jewellery was in the pit. Quite often with these pits or with the pyramids, robbers come later, right? And they find the good stuff because it's wasted lying there in the ground. But they hadn't found this one. So inside here it says there were 68 women who were cruelly killed so they could accompany their ruler into the afterlife. And they were all wearing, look at this beautiful jewellery, gold and blue. I mean, I can imagine my daughter would wear that today. You have the right dress, it's nice. You have the right earrings, go with it. This is nice. And this is from the time of Abraham. They're not just sticking bones through their noses. This is like beautiful art in metal and stone. So again, sophisticated place. Abraham is making big sacrifices when he hears God's call. And I hope that, when God calls us, that we're also, willing to not to rule it out because, it sounds a bit difficult. Abraham didn't rule it out. And because of Abraham, we now have obviously the Jewish faith, Christianity, and even Islam all come because he was willing to leave this multiple gods, very cruel, and go and worship one true God. So now Abraham, through Egypt, they then came into the promised land, and unfortunately, when they came into the promised land, the Israelites were not faithful to God. They had the law, they had the temple, but they did lots of idolatry. And what happened to them because of all their idolatry, the people of Israel?
Didn't they get sent to Babylon for like 40 years?
You are excellent. I'm glad you're here at the front. So,
Weren't they complaining a lot as well?
the complaining was coming out of Egypt. They did a lot of complaining. I know, and I'm challenged by that when I read that. So quick to forget God's blessings and to moan about how things are difficult now. So, but then because of their sin, first of all, the northern kingdom of Israel was dispersed. So that means they were not all killed, they were taken away and spread around other countries. A bit like a genocide, a bit like the Russians are taking Ukrainians and pushing them around the place and trying to mix people up. So that's what the Assyrians did with the northern kingdom of Israel, and with the south, they were taken away into exile in Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar. So what I want to show you now is just some evidence of the sin of the Israelites and their idolatry. Okay, so don't be shocked. It's more important that this is real life, and these are things that are really happening in the time of the Old Testament, and that is why we have the Old Testament prophets, because of the sin. If there was no sin, there would be no Old Testament prophets, right? So we ought to know there's bad stuff going on because we hear the people trying to correct them. But just because we hear prophets, it doesn't mean that everybody's good. It's the opposite. The fact we've got the prophets shows that most people were bad. Okay, so we'll go and have a look at a few things in here. First of all, here you can see these domestic goddesses. So these are the women with the very large breasts. Often fertility and having kids gets mixed up a lot with worshipping gods and false gods a lot. And often sex gets mixed up with religion a lot. They found 800 of these little idols and sex objects over Judah. You say, well, maybe they're just brought by the visitors or the traders. Maybe the Israelites aren't doing anything bad. No. Next to the temple, Solomon's temple, half of them, about 400, are next to the temple. So what's the conclusion? Israel, less than 100% faithful. But of course, we already knew that. Now, why am I showing you this now? Is because sometimes we think that it's harder to be a believer and to follow God now, 21st century. Like it's never been as hard as now. Load of rubbish. Okay? In every generation, during the time of these prophets, Nahum and Hosea, it was just as hard. Right? They were the lone voice. Sometimes they were taken like Jeremiah, stuck in a well. Why? Because the majority didn't want to listen to them. So none of this, it's harder for us now. No, it's always been hard. Time of Elijah, 400 to 1. Prophets of Baal against the prophet of God. So again, none of this self-pity. It was really hard for us now. It's always been like that. But the faith of Abraham says, I don't mind what the rest of her is doing. I am going to follow the Lord. As for me and my household. So this is a reminder that it has always been, the majority has been messing up, and we shouldn't take our cue from them or wait until it's easy. It will never get like that. The other things to show you here is again some place names in the Old Testament. So these are some jar handles, and written on the handles of the jar there are places that you read about in the Bible, like Hebron is a real place, Ziph is a real place. David, it talks about David in 2 Samuel was in Ziph when Saul was chasing him. Yeah. So just a reminder, these aren't like made up places, like something in Narnia or something like in Harry Potter. So these are real places that you can find on the map, and these are the handles that actually give the name of the place. And then there, the seal in the middle, the oval one, nice sort of pinky one, that says belonging to Hannah. So where do we read about Hannah in the Bible?
Samuel.
Samuel's mother. Well done. Very good. So just a reminder again, these are real places that we're talking about and real people and people's names. Now we come over here, I want to show you this. We've got some nice colour things to show you. I want you to come and look at these images here. Now if these look like what we saw at the beginning, you're correct. So these are Assyrians. This is from the palace at Nineveh, and this is from the palace at Nimrud. But I just want you to watch the colour, read the writing, and see the coloured lights, which help us to read it better. Can you see here? I won't read it all for you. I think just follow it through, but enjoy looking at the colours. Because originally this was in colour. Right? This was painted on the wall of the palace, and the reason we know that is you can find traces of the colour in the stone. Isn't that amazing? Unfortunately, his face looks a bit like one of the Simpsons in my mind. He's a bit too yellow. So you can imagine these pictures trying to, if you were coming in from a village, this would be very impressive, or if you're one of the enemies and you were visiting. And then down here, I used to think this looked like a Sunday school outing, like everyone's going on little donkeys with little children and picnics, but it's not. It's a very horrible scene. So if you can see here, this is the dispersion, you can see, the dispersion of the northern kingdom of Israel by the Assyrians. You see Nineveh. Now look, here you can see soldiers carrying a baby. But there's something horrible about to happen, you'll see. Look, what are they holding? Heads. They're carrying human heads along with them. That's not very good, right, to show the children. Give them nightmares. Now, who can tell me, I want to have maybe 3 facts about Daniel in the Bible. Who can give me 1 fact about him?
Isn't Daniel?
He was thrown into lion's
Daniel,
Lion's Den, and
Daniel, who was faithful to God, that even when they said that you shouldn't pray, he was still praying.
that's it, and he's thrown in the lion's den. And what else about Daniel?
He went against the law.
Sorry?
He went against the law, which is not to pray to any other god apart from the king.
Yeah, that's right. He also went against the law because he was supposed to eat all sorts of food, and he said, no, I'm going to go vegetarian because I don't trust where your meat's been. And he also, if you remember, the king who he was serving the king had a bad dream, and he said, I'm not going to tell you what the dream is. If you can tell me what my dream was, then I'll keep you alive. And Daniel had to guess what the dream was, but he prayed and God revealed it to him. And what was the dream that the king had that Daniel saw?
The image of the head being gold.
The head gold
The
with the 4
bracelets,
minerals,
yeah, the
exactly.
silver and the-
gold was which kingdom?
The Babylonian
Gold was
kingdom.
Nebuchadnezzar, very good, Babylon, yeah. So we had the Assyrians were before, but then after the Assyrians came the Babylonians, and that was the gold. And after the Babylonians was to come
Medo-Persians.
silver, which is Medes and Persians.
Yeah.
And after the Medes and Persians was going to come
Grecian.
It was going to come the Greeks.
Grecian
So the
kingdom,
Greeks, and the most famous Greek being Alexander, the Greek. And then after that, Roman Empire. And this is very helpful because ahead of time God revealed all these successive empires that were going to come. So let's just track them through. We've seen several Assyrian things. Now what about Babylon? So the famous king was called Nebuchadnezzar. And again, was Nebuchadnezzar a real person? Look here, you can see Nebuchadnezzar's name is actually in this brick. So again, this is evidence that the Bible is talking about real people. Nebuchadnezzar's name is in the brick. It's not just in the Bible, this is not part of the Bible, right? This is just a stone that's found in the ruins of Babylon. But when the Bible talks about it, there is independent evidence that Nebuchadnezzar was a real person with bricks like this. Now, after the Babylonians came
Medo-Persians.
Medo-Persians. Okay, here we have some Persian things. Now, do you remember there was a big party in Esther chapter 1? So there was a very big party, and then the king's wife didn't turn up, Vashti. Yeah, but here we got some things from a Persian party. Here we can see the drinking bowl, this round flat one. That's a drinking bowl from Persia. And there we can see a drinking cup, and it's quite fun. Can you see it's got the head of like a goat or a deer or something like that at the bottom. So we don't know that these were the ones that were being used, right, in Esther chapter 1. But we do know there was a party. We do know there was lots of, nice cutlery, crockery, and we know this is Persian. And that there is the head of a Persian soldier, I guess. Probably. Anyway, this head belongs to one of the Persian spear bearers that lined the stairways. So you say, well, just a human head. It is, fine. And in some ways that's not a big deal. But it's just a reminder that these are taken from the palace, these are real people, Esther's a real person. And after the Persian period, then it's the Greeks, and then after the Greeks come the Romans, and then the New Testament period. But before we leave the Old Testament completely, I'm going to show you one more thing, and there's a chance for any questions you've got. That is this object here. You see this is an orange object, which is like a rectangle with a point at one end.
Yeah.
You see the one at the end?
Yes.
It says a Passover note.
Oh.
Okay. Now this is from 475 BC. So that's still quite old. You might think that's pretty modern after we've been doing all these other things. So, but this is what's called a potsherd, what it's written on. So that is a bit of pottery. Now where in the Bible do you read about potsherds? You should read it's in the King James Bible and other translations. Let me give you some examples. Okay. Psalm 22. My mouth is dried up like a potsherd. Alright, and my tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. So what's that? A potsherd, a bit of broken pottery. Here's another one. Woe to those, Isaiah 45, woe to those who quarrel with their maker, those who are nothing but potsherds among the potsherds on the ground. Does the clay say to the potter, what are you making? So, and then also Job, it says in Job, when he was suffering covered in boils, he scraped himself with a potsherd. Now what is this? This is broken pottery. And this is an early example of recycling. Recycling didn't begin, you know, like with the Green Party or something like this. Recycling has always been there, especially when you're poor. You have to use the same thing again. So here you can see they broke a pot, so instead of just complaining, they leave it in the corner. And you build a pile of it and they use it for writing on. So that's a silly thing to write on. That's actually pretty good. That's lasted 2,500 years. Is your writing going to last 2,500 years? Probably not. Don't say it's a bad thing to write on. That's a pretty good thing. It's lasted well. But this is actually a post-it note, because these were used to send little messages up the River Nile. See, this was found on an island called Elephantine, and there was a Jewish community living on this island in the River Nile. And they were so independent they even had their own little temple. Okay, they weren't supposed to have another temple, but they did. And later on they were told to close it down. But these were Jews who were like a long way from home, and they were trying to feel like home. And the writing is in Aramaic on this. So what Aramaic words do you know from your New Testaments? There are several Aramaic words that you come across. They normally put them in italics. What did Jesus say on the cross? There we are, look, this woman knows Aramaic. You know, when there was the little girl who was 12 years old, Jairus' daughter, what did Jesus say to her? Little girl, get up. What's that word? Talitha kum. More Aramaic. Abba, father. Abba, Aramaic. So these are some words of Aramaic you already know. And there's one or two others. Ephphatha, be opened. Jesus says once to one man. So this is the Aramaic language, and now for probably the first time you're seeing Aramaic language not written in a printed Bible, but actually written by people in the 5th century BC, 500 years before Jesus. They're writing in the language that Jesus himself would be speaking. And what does this say? Well, I've got some funny little quotes from I can't remember them, so I've written them down. So one of these messages going up the river said this. Send me some salt right away today. Okay, that's what somebody put on one of these things, one of these messages. If there isn't any salt in the house, buy some from Alpe, the ferryman at Elephantine. So these are, can you see why I'm saying they're like text messages?
Yes.
So you quickly write out a message, give it to the ferryman, you know, within an hour, they're going to get it, and then hopefully later that day you'll get a message back again. And then what does this one say? This one says, to Hoshea, greetings. Take care of the children until Ahutub gets there. Don't trust anyone else with them. If the flour for your bread has been ground, make a small portion of dough to last until their mother gets there. Let me know when you'll be celebrating Passover. Tell me how the baby is doing. Isn't that amazing?
It is.
Why is this significant? Not just because it tells us what a potsherd is, also you can see one. Not just because you can see Aramaic writing, but because this is one of the earliest references in the world to the word Passover. And it's here in Oxford. So can you see they've got a little Jewish symbol on the side there? That's because for Jewish people, this is one of the top objects in the museum. Because this is like a reference to the Passover, not just in the written texts, but actually in an outside source, written down as part of the normal language and messages being sent around, like outside the Bible. So I really like this. It's kind of nice and small, and you can see the writing, but it makes it come alive. Now, for me, growing up as a schoolboy in England, I'm more comfortable with the Romans. We learn about the Romans because they invaded Britain. Although Britain's been invaded so many times. When the Italians ruled us, it was called the Romans. Then when it was the Germans ruled us, that was called the Saxons. When the Scandinavians ruled us, that was called the Vikings. And when the French ruled us, it was called the Normans. So where's the British? I mean, there's a myth, right? So anyway, this is from the time when England was ruled by the Italians, otherwise known as the Romans. Now, the reason I'm showing you these two here is because Colossians 4, verse 14, Paul writes, our friend Luke the doctor. And it's just because of that one verse that we know that Luke, who wrote the book of Luke, was a doctor, a physician. And Luke is the only non-Jew to be writing parts of the Bible. So he was responsible for the Gospel of Luke and then the book of Acts. But he was a Gentile, he's not a Jew, but he obviously, he's a good friend, he's a believer and a Christian. And why we're here is because this guy here is not Luke, but this is also a first century Greek doctor living in the Roman Empire. So you could almost be looking at Luke when you see this. And I quite like the way this is here, because it's a bit like welcome to the Roman world. When you come in through the doors, you see him. Now the weird thing is this is the doctor and his wife. And when you look closely at the face, you might wonder which is the man and which is the wife. Right? She's quite scary. Okay, so here we are. So we're now in the Roman period, and of course, when Jesus was born, this was during the time of the Roman Emperor. Herod wasn't the Roman Emperor, Herod was the local king, but it says in the time of Caesar Augustus, there was a census given. Caesar Augustus, arguably the first Roman Emperor. I say arguably because some would say Julius Caesar is the first Roman Emperor before him. So, and then there's Augustus, and then by the time Jesus has grown up, it's Tiberius is the Caesar. But this is now, we're firmly in the Roman period. So the next few things we're going to look at are all from this Roman era. And the next thing I'm going to show you is some nails, some Roman military nails. Okay? And then you can think, what does that remind you of in the New Testament? If you come around here. Okay? So if you can see just down here, one of these. These nails are found in Scotland. But they're not made by the Scottish. These are Roman nails, Roman soldiers' nails. And what period is it from? First century. So now, are these the nails that were used to crucify Jesus? No. But if you had a crucifixion in Scotland, well, guess what the soldiers would have used? Something like that. So this obviously has a special significance for Christians, seeing a first century Roman soldiers' nails. I guess you could say, well, it's kind of what I thought it would look like, but at least you can see one. It's not your imagination now. You can see what they were actually like. And that obviously, that would have no difficulty going through a wrist. Emperor Trajan. So these are letters, metal letters, taken off an arch in his honour. Now, but Trajan was an emperor, and he chose a man called Pliny to be governor of an area of Turkey called Bithynia. Now, Pliny was useless. Okay? Pliny was the governor. Pliny had no initiative. Pliny couldn't do anything without checking with the emperor. So maybe you know people like that at work. Maybe you're a bit like that. Please, I don't know, where do I, what can I take? What can I do with? So Pliny was always asking, can I set up a fire service, in Bithynia? Can I do this? Can I do that? And one problem Pliny had in Bithynia, he said, I don't know what to do about the Christians. Please, Trajan, can you tell me what to do about the Christians? I can't make up my mind. And he wrote this letter. In fact, what he did was, before he wrote to Trajan, he said, I want to find out what these Christians are really doing. I don't know what they're on about. I'm going to get a couple and torture them, see what they say, and find out really what they're doing. And he wrote his discoveries in a letter to the emperor. And if you could read that for us now. Is it the top one? Yeah, the top one. So if you could read this one. You've all got this, by the way, at the top of your sheet.
They were in the habit of meeting on a certain fixed day before sunrise and reciting a hymn to Christ as God. After this, it was their custom to separate and then meet again to partake of food, but food of an ordinary and innocent kind. For many of every age, every class, and of both sexes are being accused, nor has this contagious superstition spread through the cities only, but also through the villages and the countryside.
Thank you. There's quite a lot there. So what are some things you noticed about this letter? It's like an investigation, yeah.
They meet on a particular day.
Which day do you think that was? Probably Sunday. It doesn't say it. Probably
Saturday, because it was
Saturday or
Sabbath
Sunday.
then.
Yeah. So it could have been after dark, going into one or the other. So there's a weekly meeting, right?
Yeah.
Does that sound like Christians to you?
Yes.
Yeah. Meeting weekly. That sounds on a fixed day. That's kind of what we do. What else were they doing that we also do now? They were singing hymns. Isn't that great? Yeah. So this is early Christians, not mentioned in the Bible. This is after the Bible, because what's the date?
112.
112. So this is less than 100 years after John the Baptist appeared. This is really recent. This is not long after the ministry of Jesus and time of Paul. So they're singing hymns. What else are they doing?
They eat.
Eating. What's this food? What do you think the food was they were eating? The bread and the wine. So what does it say? Anything suspicious about it? The food. Last Supper, yeah. Anything suspicious? There were rumours that the food was suspicious.
Oh, they said they were not ordinary food.
It was because he says it was ordinary. Why? Because people were saying they're cannibals. We've heard they eat the body and the blood. So it's very bad what these early people said. So Trajan says, it's ordinary food. He tells Trajan they're eating ordinary food. In other words, they're not doing anything wrong. Right? And then what does he say? This contagion has spread. Now Bithynia, where's Bithynia? Exactly. No one's heard of Bithynia. This is amazing. That only about 60 years after Jesus, in somewhere you've never heard of, there are people having a Sunday service, having communion, singing hymns, and notice what are they praying to Christ as? Did you see? This is very, very important. They are praying to Christ as God. And people say, this idea that Jesus was God, this came centuries later. Da Vinci Code says it was decided in 300s. Rubbish, that's fiction. This is not fiction. This is a letter written by a Roman governor to the emperor. And I know this because when I was at school learning Latin, so when I was about 13, my teacher, Traps Lomax, he said, here, translate this. He didn't know I was a Christian. He said, translate this. So this is a book of standard Roman texts. And I was translating it. I was like, what is this? I'm reading about early Christians. No one told me about this letter. I thought, this is incredible. Yeah. You know, this is so old. This is just after the end of the New Testament and long before Constantine and all those things and the bishops and the monks. It's all later. This is really early. And here we see they're already worshipping Christ as God. Why? Because that's what the New Testament said they were doing. So it wasn't like New Testament's made up and it's all like, no. They were worshipping Christ as God very, very soon. Why? Because that is what the early Christians believed he was. Just like the New Testament says. You know, Thomas, my Lord and my God. So this isn't just made up. This is exactly what the evidence is that they were carrying on believing and doing it in the early church. So this is very important, again, a primary source document. This letter from to Trajan.